My name is Peter Brady. I was born in Rockhampton in a hospital and came to Braceville nearby a week later. And 3 years after that, I came to this farm where we're sitting now, and I've been at this farm for basically the rest of my life, for another 70 years from then. I'll soon be 73. My mother's name was Angela Brady, and my father, Thomas, was born in this district too. He was born in Braceville in 1920. So we've been around this part of the world for a few years. My parents farmed here, small crop farming and dairy farming. Mum was a teacher and she retired from teaching many, many years later. My parents bought this farm that day in 1952, and we've been on this farm all the rest of our life since then. I have spent a little bit of time away from here, particularly when I met my wife Lynn and moved to Bundaberg for 12 years. And this is my lovely wife Lynn, and we've been married for almost 47 years.
My parents were Eric and Olga Rosenblatt. They were both born at Gatton, and I was born at Wandai, and Mum and Dad moved to Bundaberg from a dairy farm at Bye near Mergen when I was 2.5 years old. I met Peter in Bundaberg in 1974 after he and 3 mates had left a caravan at my boss's home during the 1974 Brisbane floods, and we met on a blind date. I sort of from there I was invited up to spend the weekend in Easter 1974, and our relationship grew from there.
Oh, Mum and Dad fell in love with us the first day they met Lynn, but the trouble was I'd already fallen in love with her the first night we went out on a blind date when we went to Bargara Beach with a heap of other young people. We just hit it off from day one and have never looked back ever since. It's just been a perfect joy for 47 years.
We were married in Bundaberg at the end of 1975, and from there Peter was transferred to Bundaberg from Mount Larkham School. We spent the next 12 years driving back almost every weekend to spend the weekend here at the farm with his parents because his dad was in ill health, and we also spent all these school holidays here.
Probably the subject I'd know the most about would be the farming, and in particular the dairying in the past. The general farming of the district and the dairy farming in the days when there used to be 220 dairies that supplied a cheese factory here. Many farmers, not all of the dairy farmers, turned to butter. They turned to producing cream for butter, and that was much less profitable, and gradually the industry started to die. The late 1940s and the early 1950s was the peak of the dairying industry when there were 220 dairies. The biggest dairy had approximately 220 cows, and the smallest dairy had about 20 cows, and they varied everywhere in between. The Schaefer family, which is only 3k down the road towards Gladstone from here, they had the biggest dairy by far. Some of the families who supplied the cheese factory would have been Lukey families, Guineas, Kellys, the Brady family. There were numerous people, most of whom are now left the district. There's not very many of them left. However, we do have one dairy left, belongs to Carmel Pollock, or Carmel Mott as the married name is, and she dairies as a woman on her own. And she has maintained that one dairy left and still supplies hot milk to Rockhampton, well, chilled milk, I shouldn't call it hot milk anymore, and she gets her milk collected every second day. It's a moderate-sized dairy. It struggled very, very badly during dollar a milk times. It is just surviving now because the prices are still extremely low. And we're in a traditionally dryish part of the world, so it's hard to get milk here. In the very early days, somewhere between 1908 and 1916 or 17, towards the end of the First World War, the district was originally opened up for sugarcane. And a couple of farms, 2 or 3 farms, did grow sugarcane on a trial basis, and they grew sugarcane much heavier tonnages than Bundaberg. It was trucked out to the railway in Mount Larkham and sent to Bundaberg. The sugar mill from here that was to arrive in this district was actually politically sneaked away from the district and went to Guru up near Tully, not far away from Tully. So the district lost its opportunity to have sugar, and it became a corn and small crops area, then gradually more and more dairying. Dairying moved in, and after dairying came in the 1940s, late 1940s and early 1950s, over half of the district moved into peanuts and grew peanuts on a very large scale. Supplied a huge amount of peanuts to Rockhampton, and by the 1957 and 56 and 57 floods, the peanut industry sort of struggled after those 2 floods. And when QAL came to Gladstone town, the peanut industry struggled very much to get labour, and it died not long after. Most of the families that grew the peanuts in our district were predominantly all dairy farms. They turned over part of their dairy to peanuts because peanuts were a very good fodder that they used to make hay for the dairy stock for winter. And this district was a very hard district during winter time to produce milk. As the dairies gradually closed 1 or 2 at a time, most of those properties moved over to very small and even in most cases hobby farmer beef cattle. The dairy cattle were crossed with beef cattle initially. Some farms went straight to beef cattle and sold all their dairy cattle. Eventually, after 2 or 3 generations of breeding, the dairy cattle were bred out of the beef cattle. Our family went to Santa Gertrudis early on and put Santa Gertrudis over Illawarra Shorthorn dairy cows. After 3 to 4 generations, we lost our Illawarra completely. After 10 to 20 years of that breeding, we changed from Santa Gertrudis into Red Brahman, and that has continued to this day. The Red Brahmans now are almost a straight breed of pure Red Brahmans, and the reason being it's a relatively dry and tough district when you have droughts, and the Red Brahman is fairly close to bulletproof during drought, whereas most other breeds struggle to do as well as Red Brahman.
Some of the things that have affected farming over the years have been fires, floods, drought. It very severely has affected it. But in 2004, there was a really big fire that started in Bracewell, and it just about wiped the whole district out. We ended up with only 1 paddock out of our 333 acres in this block that wasn't burnt. It's really different living in the country than the city, because usually in the city, well, you might get people organised to come to visit you, but in the country, it's, you know, sort of a weekend, you may have anywhere from 3 to 10 different lots of people just drop in for a cuppa, which is really great because there's usually always plenty of home-baked goodies available. So I definitely prefer living in the country to the city.
Up to the weather station and see if the weather station's working.
Hasn't worked for years.
20 years.